Hey there, Knicks fans. How you doing? It's your boy, Jonathan Macri, with you for another episode of the Knicks Film School Podcast. We are keeping the heavy hitters coming here down the stretch of the Knicks season. It is a first-time guest, someone who I'm very excited to talk to because I have been a fan of his ever since. I'm trying to think when's the first time I saw the little picture of the little bird. That whenever I see your name or hear you talk on a pod, I'm like, that's the first thing that pops into my mind. But now I get to look at a face to go with the bird, a face that I've seen many other times, courtesy of the Ringer, where he works, Rob Mahoney. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. I can't hide behind the bird anymore. You know, life is strange, and it has made me a video podcaster. And look, we're just rolling with the punches over here. But yeah, once upon a time, anonymity was nice.
Yeah, Can you be a person who creates content and be an anonymous I don't think that's you can anymore, right?
You're really activating my inner existential crisis. So the answer is you can't. But here we are, and we're all doing it together. You know, we're taking the plunge. We're jumping into the internet head first, really.
Yeah, and who the hell knows where that leads? Where did Alice fall down? The bottomless tree or whatever the heck that was. Let's talk about some basketball because I want to get to some other things, but I want to start obviously with what everybody's here to hear your opinion about, and that is the Knicks. And I'm particularly interested to hear this because I talk to a lot of people all the time who watch primarily the Knicks or pay attention primarily to the Knicks, and you watch every team and you pay attention to every team. So I kind of just want to start here. Like, this team has had. In some ways it's the season people expected. I think in other ways it's an unexpected season in terms of some individual player performances, maybe in terms of how they've looked together. So I just want to know, sitting here 6 games until the playoffs, what's interesting to you about this team, about maybe a player on the team, about what's in store for them? You take this any direction you want.
Well, I would say there's what's interesting about the Jalen Brunson Knicks, who we haven't seen for a minute. And that's its own category where I really enjoy like everything about the tentpole Brunson Cat pick and roll dynamic, like how you can structure an offense around that stuff. We're going to put all that to the side because it's, again, been a second since we've seen that version of the team. In lieu of Jalen Brunson, I have enjoyed the flexibility of OG, certainly. Mikal in a similar capacity, better in some games than others. But overall, this idea that, this is an offense that, yes, is very Jalen Brunson and Cat-centric at the best of times, but has a lot of different entry points, has a lot of different potential trigger men who can do a lot of different things. And that raises some questions as far as, what is the right amount of Mikal Bridges? I honestly have no idea, but I find myself asking it more and more as we see him have some explosive games, some completely passive, invisible games. And when Brunson's out there, everything gets so much more complex as far as juggling all these, like an incredibly talented lineup goes.
Yeah, I recorded a Patreon pod earlier today, and someone had asked about are OG and Mikal Bridges two? I always forget, is it duplicitous or duplicative? The one that means
duplicative,
duplicative, like they're too overlapping. And what's interesting to me about this recent stretch that they're in, obviously the offense has fallen. I know they were already falling, but it's fallen even more. They're 19th in 14 games without Brunson. So, looking at where they are for the year, that's obviously quite a dip. But I don't get the sense watching them that it feels like OG is taking the amount of shots that he wants to take and that he's comfortable taking. Same thing with Bridges, same thing with Cat. So it's I'm not saying I'm worried about Jalen Brunson returning because, again, they're 19th in offense since he's been out. You need the guy back. But I just wonder now that everybody's kind of gotten comfortable in this new dynamic.
Yeah.
What are you expecting? Maybe it should be the question about once he does return.
Well, I would hope that they can use this dynamic to ease him in, because the last thing you want is to put Brunson back out there, immediately aggravate, run him into the ground, have some complication as a result of trying to scale him up too quickly. And so, having this machinery built in now, I think is a nice little bit of training wheels.
Thankfully, we have a coach who would never. He doesn't even know the meaning of running anything. He can't even see the ground. No,
it would simply never happen. But hypothetically, if it did, that would be very unfortunate. And I would hope that this experience has given them enough to work with to know, okay, these are the spots I can get to whether Jalen's out there or not. These are the kinds of mechanisms and actions that can work for me as OG, as Mikal, even as Cat working without, his primary pick and roll partner out there is a very different kind of look, or even as, Josh Hart, given the differences in the matchups. Like what the math for any defense going against the Knicks is so totally different when Brunson's out there versus when he's not. Yeah. And so if you're just one of the role players filling the gaps, all of a sudden your looks are dramatically different having him out there. And so I think the rising tide for those guys will be really nice. How everything makes sense in terms of OG and Mikal and Cat specifically, it is really complicated. And I hesitate to say it's going to be a universally good thing, but to the extent that I'm willing to err on that side, I think it's that Mikal in particular can maybe lean on the side of standing in the corner a little bit too much at times.
I would agree.
And so if Brunson is going to come back in and take up a Jalen Brunson sized amount of space as he eventually should, then that would be comfortable for Mikal Bridges, if not entirely, optimizing everything that he can do. And I think OG in some situations can be similar, although he insists upon himself maybe a little bit more than Mikal does.
Yeah, and that's been the biggest, probably, if there's been a revelation since Brunson went out, it's been OG Anunoby. I always, since they traded for him, obviously Knicks fans are popping up like, oh, it's, he's going to, baby Kawhi, just give him time. He's going to turn into that. I laugh. And then the last 8 games where he's averaging 26, 27 points a game. I'm like, man, how crazy is it? No, he's obviously not that, but he is putting the ball on the floor. He is drawing fouls at what is for him a borderline prolific rate.
Yeah.
This is for as big and physical as he is. This is not a guy who typically, obviously, as you know, gets to the line. Couple nice passes thrown in there, and he's just firing away from deep. All of those things should translate to when Brunson comes back. I don't see any reason why they shouldn't. The Bridges piece is interesting to me because, I heard your boss and your new colleague, Zach Lowe, say on the pod the other day, a little criticism of Tibbs because of how Bridges was used. I think that's valid, but then you watch him last night against the Cavs, and he's I said it after the game, I was like, it's just like he's playing hot potato.
Yeah.
So when you think of Mikal Bridges, do you think more of a guy who is being underutilized, or do you think more of a guy who is maybe he's just not built quite like that, or is it somewhere in between?
It's definitely somewhere in between. But if I had to pick one side, I wouldn't even say that he's not built like that. It's that he doesn't want to play that way. He doesn't want to assert himself offensively in that capacity. He's very comfortable playing to the corners, making smart cuts, being a supplementary part of the offense or a complementary part, depending on how you want to think about it. That's where he's most comfortable, and frankly, where his game is most comfortable. As somebody who doesn't have the OG size build where he can power through people on the drive, and also just doesn't really get all the way to the basket all that often when he does put the ball on the ground.
No.
It's a very pull-up oriented game. And so long as that's going to be the case, and I hate to break it to anyone who's just kind of getting attuned to the Mikal Bridges experience, that's always been the case. This is who this guy is, at least in terms of a half-court offense. Transition's a different game, but in a half-court set or a half-court scramble, he's mostly going to be a jump shooter. And there's always going to be a bit of a ceiling on those guys unless you are a Steph Curry type creative jump shooter.
Yeah, the thing that we've kind of one of the recent talking points here, and you've seen it over this stretch with Brunson out against teams that play drop coverage. He's one thing.
Yep.
He loves that. But against, again, teams that are a little bit more physical, a little bit more switchable. And so, you look at who the Knicks, should they get past the first round, which we could talk about, who opponents and whatnot. But if it is a Boston, Boston ain't giving him room to settle into his nice little mid-ranger. So I'm very curious to see what he does in the playoffs. And the other guy I want to talk to you about is Josh Hart, because I feel like Josh Hart's one of those guys. I'm always interested to hear perceptions of people who don't follow this team exclusively. In your mind, if you were another NBA team, would you be yes, we get Josh Hart out there so we could ignore him and it makes this team easier to defend? Or are you oh no, Josh Hart's going to screw our stuff up tonight?
I think it depends on who your big is. This is another reason I love watching the Knicks and why they're ultimately going to be a really fun playoff team is they are begging you to cross match with them, right? They are begging you to put a big on Josh Hart and put a really mobile 4 or a really long wing on Cat. That's what they invite you to do. And so if your big is the type who you can trust with that responsibility, and I put it that way intentionally, it is a responsibility being the guy assigned to Josh Hart. If you're not the kind of big who will put a body on people, who will box out no matter how far you are away from the basket, who will mind the cuts that will inevitably come with Josh Hart, then I think it's the kind of thing you talk yourself into as an opponent, but actually ends up biting you in the ass. And so it really is about the diligence and the focus of whoever you want to assign to guard him. Like that, it seems like the kind of thing where you're cheating the Knicks, or you're easing into the matchup, or you're kind of manipulating the game for an advantage. But if the guy guarding him is not an incredibly dedicated defender, then you're really not gaining anything in the process.
Yeah, and like when Josh Hart's going right and he's active and he is like moving around and getting himself involved in actions, the only tricky part is when he's out there, you almost. I'm curious to see what happens in the playoffs, because he punished Philly when they did this to start the series last year. You can't just pretend he's a spacer out there and expect like they're going to leave him off. So he's not involved in the action. That's going to be an issue. Let's talk about Brunson a little bit, because I think he's had an excellent season. I feel like it has maybe not been as loud of a season as last year because of all the heavy lifting. And I think he was like first or second in usage over the last after January 27th, after Julius went down. Has your opinion of Brunson changed at all this year from what you thought last year after what was kind of a magical season for him?
I don't know that it's changed a lot. And I mean that in mostly a complimentary way, right? He doesn't have, as you're saying, the same usage, the same box score pop. But ultimately, I think he's doing more than ever when he is on the floor in terms of making the players around him better and manipulating situations and controlling the action, especially in the pick and roll game. Like, he's just one of the best doing that right now. And so, yeah, there's going to be some inevitable trade-offs when you overhaul your roster in the way that the Knicks did it. I think as not just as a point guard, but as a score first point guard in a lot of different ways. A threat to score, live ball dribble anytime he's on the floor. I think he's navigated all of the additions quite well, and the balance of the offense quite well, given his skill set and what he's been asked to do. Like, I think he's having an all NBA caliber season. Absolutely. Am I surprised by his defensive liabilities? Am I surprised that he's targeted in the way he is? I am not. I think that's, again, always been who Jalen Brunson has been, more or less. But there is a different size target on his back because of who he has around him now, right? Because it makes more sense to pull him into the two-man game with Cat and try to attack those guys, as opposed to going at OG or going at Josh Hart or going at Mikal Bridges. Like, it's a pretty easy premise for an offense to attack in terms of what you would want to do.
It is. And so let's get a little bit matchup specific. One of the things that has interested me in their matchups with Boston this year in particular, like the first game opening night, I don't think they tried to switch. They were comfortable switching one possession in that game, and we saw what happened. Over the last two matchups, and the last one in particular, like they allowed Brunson to switch more, like Jalen Brown was hunting him.
Yep.
Not Tatum so much. I don't know how much they're willing to live with that one, but they were at least opening the door to some more switching. We have not yet really seen them do that with Cat as much, although there was a little bit of that too. Thinking ahead to Boston, and I know you obviously pay a lot of attention to the Celtics because they're the favorite, as they clearly should be. Do you think the only solution for this version of the Knicks roster, where like we love Mitchell Robinson here, but he's probably not going to go out there and give you 30 minutes?
No, especially in that series, we should say, I think would be a really tough matchup for Mitch.
And that's another thing that, like, I think we tend to, some Knicks fans brush under the rug, is like Mitch hasn't exactly been great against the Celtics in past matchups. And that's not his fault. They're an incredibly tough, post Porzingis, they're an incredibly tough matchup. But so, like, we've kind of settled on over here, like, you kind of just have to switch it a bunch and then live with the consequences. Is that what you're thinking? Or do you think it's, what is there any other solution that you could see?
I think you have to try it more. And this is where you really start bumping up against not just who Tibbs is as a coach, but like constitutionally what he can stomach in terms of tactics. Like, he is a pretty down the middle type, strategically speaking. Like, he has things he likes and he has things he doesn't. I think they probably need to be junkier than they have been in terms of playing teams like the Celtics. Like, not only do you need to be switching, I think you need to be dedicating a lot of time to practicing scram switching, specifically this idea of like, you don't even let Jalen get to the screen whoever is like, I would much rather live with the scramble. And the Celtics are a particularly tough test for this because they will hit shooters so quickly and they will test your timing so precisely. But what is the point of acquiring Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby if you are not relying on them in exactly these sorts of situations, not just to guard Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown types, but to dramatically change the whole matchup play, right? The entire strategy, the tactics of the floor. And the way you do that is by not letting Jalen Brunson get involved in the screen in the first place. That as soon as his guy goes up to set it, Jalen, you're getting yanked to whoever the nearest man is, and that defender is going in his stead. I don't even care who it is. It's a better option than Jalen Brunson. I
love that. And it's interesting you bring that up. And I know they haven't played the Celtics in a while, but it's definitely since Brunson's been out, and I think it goes even maybe a little bit further back than that. They're second in the league in turnover percentage for now, like a goodly, portion of the season, or at least for them. Again, you just talked about Tibbs teams. What do Tibbs teams not do? They do not gamble, and yet they are still turning teams over a lot. And like that sort of more aggressive defense, like, are you going to get had on some possessions? Yeah, of course you're going to get had on some, but guess what? You're already getting had on a whole lot of possessions against these great offenses. I love that idea. I'm curious if they do it more, but then, and now maybe we could get into Boston a little bit. Like that's where Tatum, I was surprised. I don't know if I should have been surprised. I was surprised to look up the other day. Like Tatum's averaging more assists this year than Giannis.
Yeah.
Like I think he has become such a game changer for that team, and I just like, they're looked at as such a team. But I gotta ask you, like, when you think of like value to particular teams, do you think Tatum is at least in the conversation with like what SGA is to the Thunder, Jokic is to Denver, like in that class?
I think he's in that class. Well, I think maybe just the subclass below it. If I'm being
one notch, okay,
one notch below, and some of that I'm going to admit might be on me. It's really hard to calibrate specific strength as it relates to a team. Like the Denver Nuggets offense with and without Nikola Jokic, night and day different. The Oklahoma City Thunder offense with and without Shea, totally different enterprises. What Tatum brings is balance, right? He brings a lack of weakness. You cannot target him in any way on either side of the ball. You cannot force him into something that he's not comfortable doing because he's pretty much comfortable doing everything. And as you alluded to, has really evolved into a pretty sophisticated, actual, legitimate point forward type, which is not like, however you conceptualize the Celtics as this sort of like drive and kick machine. A lot of that driving and kicking is starting with Jason Tatum and starting with him creating a one-on-one advantage, which he is better at doing than, the vast majority of the league short of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And so, he may not be quite at that like mega star. Again, it's a 1 and 2 MVP race for a reason. But once we get past that category, I would hear the argument for Jason Tatum against basically anybody else.
Yeah, I was talking to someone who I won't name, but they will be voting on All NBA this year, and MVP and All NBA, and I'm like, I have Tatum third for MVP ahead of Giannis, which I guess is that a hot take? I don't know.
I think Giannis is probably the consensus, but it shouldn't be a hot take because if anything, Tatum would be the consensus 4. And if you can't argue 3 and 4, what are we doing here?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Well, speaking of Giannis, let's talk about him because as of right now, I think they finally pulled away from the Sixers. That game was tied like late in the third quarter tonight.
It's disconcerting.
I mean, although I guess Doc did say before the game, well, let me ask you about Dame because that's a relevant topic. Again, it's the presumed first round playoff matchup at this point.
Yep.
Obviously he's a game changer. Do you think he makes them significantly more dangerous as a real threat to do anything in the playoffs if Lillard came back?
Oh, for sure. I think he's their only chance to make any real impact on the playoffs. I think otherwise you're just relying way too much on Giannis. You're relying way too much on the kind of like coming and going streak shooting of your Taurean Prince types and your Kyle Kuzma types. Some have much higher percentage clips than the other. But take a team like the Knicks, for example. You have Dame out there. All of a sudden having Cat in a deep free throw line drop doesn't feel so safe anymore, right? It feels like a totally different proposition with Dame Lillard on the floor. You don't, and you're running a lot of your offense through Giannis. You're relying on Kyle Kuzma as a ball handler. You're putting the ball in the hands of, I always like defense first guards, first and foremost, like your Ryan Rollins types who have been playing for them and will play a significant role for them in the backcourt. it's just a totally different thing. And like those guys have earned their minutes. They have found their way. The Bucks have, in a sense, without Dame. But I just don't think they're a real threat, not just to the Knicks, but to the Pacers or to the Pistons. Like I just think they're a little bit dead in the water if Lillard isn't out there.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's weird though, because Dame, I mean, it was only 2 games that Dame played against the Knicks this year, and like he got, I know he got numbers, but like watching those games, I mean, this is going to sound bad against Lillard, but like they were so empty calories. They felt empty calories as it was happening. And maybe that's because Brunson has gotten so comfortable attacking that defense.
Yes.
Yeah, which is why I think at this point, even if you told me Dame was going to come back, I would at least have to think about it in terms of Bucks versus Pistons as a first round matchup. But let's talk about Detroit. One of the best stories in the NBA this year. For me, the thing that worries me the most is that they have a jumbo ball handler who like has punished Brunson this year in a way that I don't know that a ton of other players have punished. Like Brunson he is being forced into those actions. It is relentless. What about Detroit is most interesting to you from a perspective of looking at a potential matchup with the Knicks?
I mean, I would love to bring something more nuanced to the table than exactly what you described, which is not just a punishing. No. I just mean like you have to start with Cade because he is such a dominant and oversized ball handler relative to the defenders that the Knicks would be able to throw at him. And not just that, like physically imposing, but he's so great at diagnosing the floor. He's so great at making very quick and very precise reads. And Detroit is just miles ahead spacing wise of where it's been in previous seasons, and even miles ahead from where it was earlier in the year. There's still places in the rotation you can cheat off of and clog up. Cade Cunningham's a pretty good mid-range threat as well, pretty good in the in-between game. So it's not a matter of like, oh, can you protect the rim well enough? It's can you protect all of the space on the floor well enough? That feels pretty dangerous to me from a Knicks perspective. Like there's matchups that can work for them. Obviously, they have some bodies to throw at someone like Cade, but Brunson's going to get dragged into the mix, and they have shooters too who are like good at screening and popping in that situation and can just really, really punish you.
I don't think Malik Beasley has missed a shot against the Knicks this season. Shout out to Mark Campbell, former guest of the spot, who used to be Malik Beasley's shooting coach. Anyway, let's zoom out, do big picture Knicks, and then we'll touch on some other stuff. Sure. Is there a thing for you that like you need to see in the playoffs that if you were like advising Leon Rose, like, man, if this doesn't happen, you gotta look to just reshuffle the deck again for the second time in 2 years? Or is there like a thing that, maybe flipping that on his head, if you do see something that you'll like be super encouraged about with this general core moving forward?
I would say I'm pretty conservative on these things, just as like a basketball decision-making experiment goes. So
that's why I
probably wouldn't hit the self-destruct button just yet. Like this roster has its limitations, has its quirks. Clearly, you're trying to navigate all those. There's still a really promising core here, and there's still a lot to work with. And I think what I'm looking for to find optimism is, can they get some of that like rowing in the same direction resolve that they had in last year's playoffs? Like, I'm shaking my head because it's been the story of the year. It just hasn't quite been there. It has it, like the hiccups, the friction, the like shrugging frustration after certain breakdowns. Like it just has not clicked in quite the way that I think many people with the Knicks would have anticipated it would, right? Like that was supposed to be the benefit of getting guys with baked in chemistry. And it just has not manifested that way. And so if you can see some of that start to come together, some of all of the minutes that the core guys have played together start to pay off and culminate in something. And I think culminate specifically in the kind of like momentum and energy and force that made them so formidable in last postseason. That's what I would love to see.
It's so interesting because you're someone, again, that has to pay attention to all 30 teams. And the fact that that's the first thing you went to me speaks volumes, because like, it sounds silly when you're sitting here and be like, what can they do differently? Well, maybe hit the play better button. But and it's not about playing better, because if you look at all of 5 of these starters, and it really is the starting 5, like, okay, Brunson's had a really good season. Cat has been better than, if you ever watch Cat, this is like better than what you probably would have expected. OG's been really good. And then Hart and Bridges are the 2 guys you're like, but you look at their overall numbers. Bridges, when he's been good, he's been really good.
Yes.
So it's not even like you could point the finger of blame or be like, well, it's fine because as long as they switch out this piece or that piece, because I don't see that obvious answer, and it sounds like you don't really either.
I don't either. And yeah, look, the play better button is quite effective when you can find it. The other concerning thing about the Knicks in terms of their makeup and in terms of like what they are this season is they don't have the other button that basically every other team has, which is play your best players more button. And as far as like playoff adjustments go, the vast majority of playoff adjustments are, our best players playing 40 minutes a night now. And the Knicks don't have as much like runway with that kind of stuff as everyone else. Like they already are playing not maxed out, but pretty close for a regular season standard.
Well, there are a not insignificant subset of Knicks fans who would push back, maybe not on the play your best players button, but play your best lineups button. And the fact that Josh Hart, I think he's still leading the league in minutes. And I mean, even last year when that team was awesome, like, Benji Ritholtz, our colleague here at Knicks Film School, has always been fond of saying, like, Josh Hart is a 25-minute a game guy. That's what he should be. That is what his skill set dictates. And the fact that he is automatically a 35 plus minute a game guy. So, we'll see, Deuce McBride's injured now. Hopefully he gets back this weekend. Let's talk a little bit of NBA. The West is a freaking bloodbath. We're going to get out of here well in advance of a big game tonight. That'll already have happened by the time this pod posts. Lakers, Warriors. Give me something that intrigues you out West, or something you're paying close attention to.
I have just done a dramatic reversal on the Wolves, who I was highly, highly concerned about maybe like mid-December. And just they did not have the juice. At that point in time, the defense was not up to usual Minnesota standards. Mike Conley was a shell of himself, being targeted on defense, could not hit his floaters, could not hit his threes. It was like problems up and down the rotation. All of a sudden, I'm going to invoke something very sensitive for Knicks fans. Julius Randle's playing great, and I don't know what to do with that.
No, man. Julius went out. Let me just say this. He went out on top in terms of fans' opinions. There were people who were like, we are better off not having him, but I don't know many Knicks fans who were like, good riddance, get that guy the hell out of it. Like, there's good feelings there. So you're not stepping on any toes there.
Even just in the sense of how much anyone, me included, is supposed to trust it, right? Like there are so many ebbs and flows with the Julius Randle experience, and he's had a great month. And preceding that, the Wolves had a month or so where he was out and they were a disaster. Like he's proven to be really essential to them. And so it's like Ant star is rising. Julius Randle's playing well. Gobert is playing more assertive basketball than he has at any point this season. Dante DiVincenzo is like finally really clicking into place for them. Mike Conley's back, looking more or less in usual Mike Conley form, really shooting the lights out lately, especially. Yeah. And they're finding some like depth pieces, right? Like some rookies and some guys, like they've had Nickeil Alexander-Walker, but Jalen Clark has just like come out of the woodwork.
I was about to say,
really fun effort defend, like the guy that any winning team would love to find come January, February. They're like, oh, this guy on our team is just like ready for minutes now. And I just find myself thinking like OKC is going to be there. Like they're going to be in the conference finals. I'm drawing them in. Short of that, I don't know that I'm looking at anybody else in the West and saying that is a definitively better team than the Wolves, or that's a team that the Wolves just simply could not beat.
I'm still... I love that you brought up Randle because he has been awesome and they have been awesome. I'm still very curious, like tight game.
Oh,
what's the closing lineup? Because
playoff Randle's also a very different thing, to be fair.
Well, I mean, look, but in fairness, like the series against, or the playoffs against, not this past year because he was injured the year before that, he was not right physically. Like he was a badly sprained. I think it was an ankle. And he came back, and give him credit for coming back. And then you have the Hawks series, which was like his first playoff experience. Like it was a little deer in the headlights. I'm not as much with that as I am more like you look at the numbers for the Wolves and the on-off stuff, and it's like this team is like they need Rudy out there. Like it's very. I think you have to have him out there. And then you look at Naz Reid, and it's like, boy, this team seems to play really well with Naz Reid's on the court. And then obviously, I would imagine DiVincenzo is going to be closing games for them, and obviously, and it's like you start to run out of spots. So I'm just
yes.
It's interesting to me. That's what I'm going to be paying attention to with them when you get some big games.
Well, especially like for as talented as they are, and you're right, they're going to have to make some either or decisions that are tough. And the question in a lot of those cases is, do you trust the players to also be emotionally and mentally tough when their number isn't called? And there are some incredible competitors with the Wolves. There are also some guys who can be a little thin-skinned, who can get their feathers ruffled. Rudy is among them. Dante is among them. Jaden McDaniels is among them. Julius Randle's obviously among them. And so it's like, if that happens one game, I think a lot of guys can play through that. If it's happening every game that's close, then you have a different, like a completely different ordeal on your hands. And now you're talking about, we have 15 minutes in a rotation where this guy's just like half-assing it on defense because he doesn't believe in what we're doing.
I don't know if this is a compliment or not, but I don't know that you could say this as much about any other team. I think the Wolves' biggest nemesis is themselves.
Maybe.
I know, because they could beat anyone. And it's just like, do you trust them? You mentioned penciling Oklahoma City into the conference finals. Who do you? I mean, I guess maybe aside from Minnesota, is there anyone you think is a legitimate threat to prevent them from going to the finals?
I think there's teams that could threaten them in certain ways, right? Like Denver's size would be a really tough thing for them to deal with, even with Isaiah Hartenstein, even with Chet Holmgren, right? Like Nikola Jokic is a different animal as far as playoff matchups go. You can't just zoom past that. I think the Lakers, I'm kind of torn because on the one hand, they've sacrificed some of like the center size that has been difficult for OKC teams past in a pre-Hartenstein era. But now they have Luka Doncic, who just beats the Thunder basically every time he plays them. So you have two of the most sophisticated playmakers on the floor in the entire league, in the recent history of the league, and a lot of like forward size that I think could be really tough for the Thunder in certain ways. Like they rely on being able to swarm you and swipe down and take things away from you. And if you're bigger and burlier kind of across the board, how does that play out? I would love to see a Lakers matchup. I would love to see a Nuggets matchup. Other than that, I mean, maybe the Warriors can make things interesting against the Thunder. I think this is the ultimate answer. Is I would love to see the Thunder beat either a Lakers or a Warriors team. I would love to see them have their like, we beat LeBron or we beat Steph. We beat like an institution kind of moment, because what this season feels like to me is 2015 Warriors. Like this is the start of something really remarkable for the Thunder. It is, I'm not saying it's going to be a dynastic effort, but like the first season, no one quite knows how much to believe in the playoff success of the thing that was so amazingly effective in the regular season. And we're all still getting up to speed with like, okay, well, can they do it? Can they push through multiple rounds? Can they kind of overcome some of the weaknesses that held them back last year?
Yeah, it's just regarding the Lakers, I've taken to calling them, they're the biggest small ball team in like the history of basketball.
That's the way to think about it for sure.
Which I think is what you want to be if you go like where the sport is heading. With OKC, like I'm with you, and like I don't know emotionally, put it out there, how I'm going to react with Hartenstein, because I love Isaiah Hartenstein.
Yeah.
Like he, for 2 years here, was worth more than some other guys who have spent a lot longer time in a Knicks uniform. And I'm rooting for him because I like, again, love the dude, but it also is going to hurt so much because like he should be a Knick.
Yeah.
Like there's just these, and look, I don't blame him. Like they took the bag.
I mean, does it make it better or worse that they just like literally could not afford it? You know, it's like,
I didn't get upset. I didn't get upset at all because, like, what are you going to do? You're going to go back in a time machine and say, no, Leon, you should have signed him to a 3-year deal and not a 2-year deal. So you got full bird rights. Like he was a backup center, and he was yes, the analytics loved him.
Sure.
But like still that deal. And they, by the way, the money they paid him was they maxed out. They couldn't have paid him any more money. They had to do all kinds of maneuvering for that. I can't go down this road. It is the alternate universe path for Knicks fans. I think that it's like, because that we could talk about the Bridges trade and the Cat trade, but it's like once Hartenstein, reached that income bracket, it's just it changed everything.
Well, so many of the Knicks problems we talked about are there. Yes, we're talking about Mikal Bridges problems or Josh Hart problems. But as we were alluding to with the Hart conversation, what we're really talking about is there just aren't alternatives. There just aren't viable alternatives in the rotation to plug in. And maybe that's somewhere where like, look, I have been guilty in the past of overestimating perhaps the impact of a Daylon Wright, for example. I'm just like a fan of how he plays.
Dude.
He's
been pretty good.
He's been really good, and he's something just materially different, right, than like what you would get from Landry Shamet, what you would get from like Deuce McBride, both good defenders, but differently sized, different skill sets, different strengths. So it's like they just need more guys like that to say, oh, we have an option. If this guy in a rotation isn't working, we can excise him and play someone like Delon Wright more. If we had an Isaiah Hartenstein type, then we're not talking about Mitchell Robinson having to live and die with every matchup. It's like, maybe this is a series, maybe it's not.
The guy that I wanted them to get, speak of the Lakers, I wanted them to go after Dorian Finney-Smith because you could feel okay about sticking Dorian Finney-Smith on an opposing team's center.
Yes.
And you're not killing. Like, I know it's Tibbs, but I think even Tibbs would have been like, okay with that. And there was just never any noise there, which, look, it is what it is. I got to get you out of here before too much longer. And I would be mad at myself if I didn't ask you a couple questions about the Ringer.
Sure, please.
Because when I say that we are a little Ringer obsessed here at Knicks Film School. Like, my favorite podcast is The Big Picture, of a podcast which you have, of course, been on many times. Always enjoy your appearances on there. It just seems like a very cool place in that you're here talking to me about basketball. Yeah. And yet you'll go and you'll be talking about like White Lotus, or you'll be doing a movie draft. Like, I'm just curious, I don't know how else to ask this. Like, what's that like? Like, it seems like a pretty cool job in that sense to be able to dip your toe in so many different pools.
It's extremely cool. And like, I came to it much from the same place that you're describing, which is just like The Big Picture was my favorite movie podcast, and The Watch was my favorite TV podcast. And I'm listening to Bill all the time. Like, I was consuming so much Ringer content before I started working there. And now it's like, oh, I just get to pick those people's brains or go on shows and talk with them about whatever fucking show or movie I'm watching at the time. How cool is that? And then professionally speaking, I think there's an incredible value for people like us who are like living and dying NBA basketball all the time. And there comes a point in late January, early February where it's like, man, it's just the dog days of the season. The regular season product isn't delivering in the way you would like it to. Like, I'm tuning in because like I need to watch these games. I need to know what's going on. But like, you want a change of energy and it's something just like to divert a little bit of attention. And I always think of it in like a creative input and output way, right? It's like if you're writing a bunch, at some point you need to stop writing and you need to go consume some kind of art, whether it's reading, whether it's watching something, whether it's going to a concert, whatever it is. Like, you need creative input to put anything out there in the world. And so it's like, I get to just like shift gears and just go watch TV for a while for work. And that's an incredible privilege to have.
It's so funny because like, I'm just thinking about, as you're talking about this, like you could have one line of logic where it's like, well, you know, like you should, if you're going to be an expert at the level of like being like the basketball person for the Ringer, you should only be doing basketball. Yeah. But it's ultimately about putting out content that is enjoyable in addition to being informative, and to get your creative juices flowing and kind of switch it up and keep yourself fresh. That must be real. Like you said, it must be such a privilege. And like, almost, I would imagine this is encouraged, like, you know, there.
Yes, absolutely encouraged. Like, that's the kind of skill set that they want to grow. Like, they want you to expand. They want you to try new things. And like, we're talking about a work situation in a specific company, but we're also talking about like a specialization argument overall for, say, like how you raise your kids in sport. Should they only play basketball, or should they also play soccer? Should they also play baseball? And it's like, there's a lot of data across a lot of walks of life that tells you if you do one thing over and over and over again, you will get worn down by it physically and mentally. And so whatever capacity you have to step outside of that, I think is really, really valuable. And it just so happens for me that the parts that I get to step outside with are not just, you know, when I clock off of work and I get to spend my free time. It's also on the clock at work when I get to try all these other things with just the best people doing it, honestly, like across our culture coverage.
Yeah, that's the last thing I'm going to ask you. Again, this is just me fanning out. Like, the people seem very cool. Like, people you'd actually want to hang out with. Is it as it seems listening from our end?
I would say absolutely. Like, everyone has been incredibly generous, incredibly cool about everything. And again, you're picking the brains of the people who you would most want to hear on any given topic. And that's just the workplace I get to walk into physically or digitally basically every day. So it's an incredibly lucky position to be in.
Well, it's really cool to get to follow you and continue to follow your work on there. Again, any NBA fan has been following you and reading your stuff and listening to you for a very long time. What's something that we should have our eye on from you? Over the coming days and weeks, whatever else. I
mean, the playoff coverage is clearly about to ramp up, so you can check out. I'm on a regular podcast on the Ringer NBA show. Before that, though, I'm actually about to pop down to Dallas for the Luka Doncic return game. So there will be again? That's next Wednesday, April 9th. Okay. I'm definitely going to be writing off that game. I'm sure we'll be podcasting about it. Just one of the events of the remainder of the regular season, to say the least.
Is that going to be? I wonder if that has a chance to be the most watched, one of the most watched regular season NBA games ever. It has to be, right?
I think it has a good shot. Even in this ratings depressed landscape, I think it's going to look. I know there's going to be an incredible media and fan appearance there. I think the energy in the building is going to be insane. It's just, I was thinking about this in terms of, I've been in a lot of arenas for a lot of huge games, but when I think back on the most memorable ones, it's always a huge game. It's a huge playoff performance. It's an unexpected outcome. Yeah. I've never been a part of something that's oh, this is coming in baked in, and the people in the building are angry at their own team and incredibly supportive of the visiting player. It's never something. I just can't think of anything quite like it.
Yeah, I was. Who did they beat on the Anthony Davis shot last night? They beat somebody at the last second. I forget whoever the hell it was, but the fans were. They're still into this team.
Oh yeah,
they haven't given up. And I just if that game's close with 5 minutes to go, if you're a Dallas fan sitting there, what are you supposed to do? I find it very fascinating, and it's very cool that you're going to be able to be in the building for that. That's really awesome.
Oh, I can't wait to find out what they do. Boo, cheer, freak out, lose their minds. I'm sure all of the above.
I would get drunk if I was a Dallas fan and going at that game because everybody wins. Rob Mahoney, this has been an absolute blast. I really appreciate you coming on. I hope it's not the last time. I hope I can have you on maybe over the summer. We'll talk some free agency trades, whatever else.
Hold on. Hold on, because Rob didn't plug the most important piece of content that he has to do over maybe the rest of his career. And it's this Sunday, or I guess technically it'll be early next week, when you get to recap the season finale of White Lotus.
This is true.
Which John and I both watch religiously, and another piece of Ringer content that should be plugged.
I am also on a podcast called the Prestige TV Podcast, in which we will be recapping White Lotus, among other things. We're currently trying to figure this out because it's a 90-minute finale. Every indication is this thing's going to be pretty explosive and pretty surprising. I think I would certainly hope, given the pacing of this season, I kind of think post finale, a lot of people are going to be walking back their skepticism. I have not seen it. I haven't seen any screener. Okay, I have no inside knowledge other than what has been put out there.
I always do this. I ask one more question when I say I'm done. Who's the character you're most interested to see what happens to them in the finale?
Hold on. Anybody that's watching this podcast,
this isn't a spoiler.
He's going to ask about a character. You're asking about a character. He might. I'm just giving the disclaimer. You don't know how people react to.
You meet all the characters in the first 5 minutes of the first episode.
Right. Maybe someone hasn't watched the first 5 minutes of the first episode. Okay. This is just spoiler etiquette. Rob gets it. I know, because you probably get all the emails of how could you mention this? I haven't done this. Gotten to this point in the show yet.
Even as a person on the internet, I find myself very spoiler sensitive. if someone I know well tells me oh, you're going to love this episode, I'm why would you tell me that? I don't want to know what you think I would think of this show, because that informs the way I'm looking at it. But blanket spoiler for season 3 of White Lotus. Be warned. Please exit if you're not up on it yet or don't want to be. I think some of two minds. I am very eager to see what happens for Carrie Coon's Lori. Just probably my favorite character in the season so far. And so I love spending time with her. I love the continued spin out. I want to see what happens for her in the finale because I like what's going on. As a counterpoint, I have no idea what is manifesting or going on in Walton Goggins' Rick storyline, to the point that everything wrapped up so weirdly in the penultimate episode that something has to happen to sort of put a bow on what he's been going through. So one is leaving me wanting, one is leaving me wanting more. I think I can't wait to see all of it.
I love it. Everybody go listen to that. We'll watch White Lotus first and then go listen to that.
Yes.
Not a mention of the rat lifts I can see.
I love the rat lifts. Look,
okay.
I'm
kind of over them.
You're done.
We found out 5 episodes ago that he his world is crashing back in the States, right? Nothing else has happened since. He put his phone away, and so did his character. What?
If you were a dad, you would have.
Oh, I wouldn't. That's
you feel different.
This is a running joke. That I don't know.
Andrew doesn't have kids. I have 3 kids
because I don't have kids. Real quick, I need to say something to Rob also, because especially with you here, John, because you and Joanna and even more specifically, Chris Ryan are heroes of mine, specifically in the context that you guys are TV personality, like you're TV critics. You have a voice and an opinion that people will go to on a platform, and none of you have seen The Sopranos. And I have been ridiculed and judged in New York Knicks Film School circles by this guy and his lawyer buddies and our buddy David Futternick, who's an actor out in Hollywood. And every time I try to start it, I'm like, yeah, but you don't know the this and the that and the Pine Barrens and you got a Bing. And it's like, I watched Lost. How's that? And to hear that there are people with stature that also haven't seen it, it makes me feel a little less ridiculed and judged.
There are dozens of us, you know?
Yes, dozens. I'm happy to be one of the dozen. Exactly.
I'm an Italian from Staten Island. If I didn't watch it, they would have kicked me out of kicked me off. But,
look, geographically, demographically speaking, I think I may be allowed a certain grace that maybe you guys are not. Like, that's just the reality of the situation.
I still just get to point to like, oh, you like The Watch. One half of that pod has never seen The Sopranos. So I guess I don't have to feel bad anymore.
Enough of this. This is nonsense. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Rob, again for coming on. And thanks everybody out there for checking out another episode of the Knicks Film School Podcast. If you haven't seen The Sopranos, go watch it. We'll be back with more fun and games before you know it. Peace out.